Good morning, I'm Tamara Shoemaker. Yesterday, we missed our church service because the rest of my family slept in. And I hold some influence in my family, but when it comes to the battle of mom's voice plus all the alarm clocks versus sleep, I'm afraid I'm fighting a losing battle. So I need to fix this, but it's a struggle for another day. Anyway, we turned on our church's Zoom service, but 2 of the 3 kids were still asleep. So when they got up, I went ahead and went over to YouTube and I found a message from Priscilla Shirer that I had shared a few weeks back that I thought was really good, that she had spoken at a Passion conference back in 2018. And let me tell you, it's a holy word. The Spirit's anointing was on that message, and I was wrapped up and I was enthralled in the very presence of the Lord himself. And I listened to that message and I felt like I was standing in the courtroom of heaven before the throne of the Ancient of Days, where, he presided among his thousands upon thousands of angels and angelic attendants, and the Son of Man had just stepped forward and had been given authority and glory and sovereign power, and holiness just reigned. And one of my kids squirmed around and yawned and said, "How much longer is this?" And another one moaned and said, "I have a headache." And the third one said, "What does apostle mean?" And that's when I truly understood the meaning of the word anticlimactic. So, today in Esther, I want to start at the end of chapter 2 because there's a significant kerfuffle that, from certain positions of power that happens here. And I didn't get to it yesterday, but it's important in the story. So we're going to talk about it. In Esther chapter 2, verse 19, it says, "When the virgins were assembled a second time," and I'm going to pause there for a second, Esther had already been made queen at this point. Lest we forget, 2 verses before this, we read that, the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women, and she won his favor and approval more than any of the other versions of Esther 2:17. So the king put a crown on her head and he proclaimed her queen. But the collecting of women continued unabated. Why is this important? Because it sets up the distance that is necessary to understand in a couple of chapters at the climax of the story, which is going to happen very soon. I promise we'll get there. The king had his queen. The king occasionally saw his queen, maybe, but with the influx of beautiful girls brought to his bedchamber every night, he didn't spend a lot of time missing her. Okay, continuing on. When the virgins were assembled a second time, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. Esther 2:19. This is also important. I'm going to pause there. So reading the story growing up, I figured that Mordecai, had lots of time to sit around. I read about him sitting at the king's gate, and I figured maybe he was playing tiddlywinks or something while he wished Esther was back in his own home. And it took me a while to realize how significant it was that Mordecai sat at the king's gate. Okay. The gate of a city was where important business was conducted. It was essentially the Senate and House chambers of Congress, basically. It was where Boaz conducted his business with the man who had the nearer right to marry Ruth than he did, and that was Ruth 4:1-11. You can read about it there. Further back, it's where people brought their grievances against one another to the city elders to be decided. Deuteronomy 21:18-20 and Joshua 24 are good examples of those. Lot sat in the gateway of Sodom when the 2 angels arrived to rescue him from its imminent destruction. So he was in leadership in Sodom. That's Genesis 19, verse 1. Kings held audiences in the gateways of their cities, 2 Samuel 19:8 and 1 Kings 22:10. So you can look up all those verses if you want to. I didn't take the time to write them out or anything. But in other words, the fact that Mordecai is sitting at the king's gate was significant in that it meant that he likely was involved in some sort of political leadership within the city of Susa. He would likely have been respected. Maybe he would have even had some clout with the king. So here's something. Mordecai held this leadership position even though he told them that he was a Jew in exile from his homeland. That's found in Esther 3:4. He did tell them. But Esther had kept secret her family background and nationality, just as Mordecai had told her to do. For she continued to follow Mordecai's instructions as she had done when he was bringing her up. That's Esther 2:20. So I don't know why Mordecai let it be known that he was a Jew, because Jews were seen as different, possibly traitorous. given their background. In Esther chapter 3, verse 8, Haman, who I'm going to introduce here in just a second, tells the king, there is a certain people dispersed and scattered among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom, whose customs are different from those of all other people, and who do not obey the king's laws. Jews were seen as traitors, which is an ironic assessment given what happens here with Mordecai. Mordecai must have understood the danger of Jewish identity in such a setting, because he made Esther promise to keep her background a secret, but he told on himself. I don't know why. Maybe I'm going to find out as I keep going. I don't know. Maybe I won't know. Anyway, it's because Mordecai is in his position, sitting at the king's gate, likely filibustering and meeting in caucuses and all that, that he's in prime position to hear important details, like, assassination plots against the king. Esther 2:21-23 says, during the time Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate, Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's officers who guarded the doorway, became angry and conspired to assassinate King Xerxes. But Mordecai found out about the plot and told Queen Esther, who in turn reported it to the king, giving credit to Mordecai. And when the report was investigated and found to be true, the two officials were hanged on a gallows. All of this was recorded in the book of the Annals in the presence of the king. A lot happens in these verses. There's a really, really steep buildup to an important and adrenaline-producing point. It's like the plot of a spy movie, right? Two guys having a whispered conversation behind the bushes, and Mordecai is just close enough to hear. He watches them walk away. Maybe one of them, meets his gaze, and Mordecai feels all the cortisol empty into his fight or flight nervous system response as he realizes if they know that he knows that what they know, he knows he's going to die, right? So now he has to get a message to Esther, and there's a risk that the messenger is going to see it and spread the word. Maybe there's someone he trusts to get it to her. However that happens, he manages to make her understand what's going on. At that point, it's still early in the phase of her queenship, right? And Esther apparently still sees King Xerxes now and then. Let's call it the honeymoon phase, even though the king is still stocking up his harem. Esther tells Xerxes. Xerxes investigates. He finds it to be true. The two officials were hanged on a gallows. In Persian tradition, this meant that they were not hanged from a tree like you think of now, like in lynchings or whatever, but it meant that they were impaled on poles set up on display. The king had his scribes dutifully record Mordecai's good service into his chronology of kingdom events, and the matter was forgotten. Anticlimactic. Not that Mordecai was necessarily seeking a reward, right? But perhaps he hoped that he could somehow get closer to the king in order to be able to see Esther more often. I don't know, but nothing happened, which makes the insult and the injury of the beginning of Esther chapter 3 a little bit sharper and a little more stingy, right? After these events, some 4 years or so after Esther's selection as queen, so honeymoon's over by that point, King Xerxes honored Haman, son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and that's important, I'll get to that tomorrow, elevating him and giving him a seat of honor higher than that of all the other nobles, Esther 3, chapter 3, verse 1. So look at that contrast, right? We've got this really cool buildup of a heroic dissolution of an assassination plot, and then the letdown of no climax in Mordecai's story. But here at the beginning of Haman's story, we have a non-event leading to a great honor that raised Haman in prominence. So Mordecai equals unrewarded merit, and Haman equals unmerited reward. So perhaps Mordecai didn't really think about it. Maybe he was just doing his job, and it didn't really matter about the slight against him. But if he did think about it, it would be kind of a natural reaction, right? Here are my gifts laid out in service of my king. Why hasn't he noticed? O king, I've been daily meeting in your gates every morning. Every morning I lay my sacrifices before you to honor you and to please you. And I don't feel your approval. I don't feel your notice. Sometimes I wonder if you remember that I exist. Sometimes I wait at this gate all day long as I strive to fulfill your laws, your decrees, to do the right thing. But even when I do, you don't notice me. We're still talking about Mordecai, right? Are we, though? Let's flip over to John chapter 10, verses 9 and 10, where Jesus says, I tell you the truth. I am the gate for the sheep. All who ever came before me were thieves and robbers, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I'm not sure how it works now, but at that time period when Jesus walked the earth, the shepherd, when the shepherd would corral his sheep in the sheepfold, there weren't necessarily wooden gates to close, ready to close them in. The shepherd himself would lie down across the entrance to the sheepfold for the purpose of keeping out the wolves coming to steal and kill and destroy and keep the sheep in overnight. But the shepherd himself, the gate, kept out the enemy, kept the sheep safe. So let me ask this. What is our motive in sitting at the gate? Are we sitting at the gate because the gate is the place of power, the place of decision, the place of gifts and sway and influence? See, if that's the place where we're sitting, all that effort to be noticed by the king because of our striving will only end anticlimactically. Or are we sitting at the gate because the gate is Jesus? Because if that's the place where we're sitting, if we're sitting at Jesus' feet, we have fellowship with him and him with us. We have protection under his watchful care, right? We have chosen what is better, and it won't be taken from us. That's Luke 10:42. Mary, in that story, sat at Jesus' feet. Martha, flustered and flushed, flew around the kitchen to complete her acts of service, but in so doing, couldn't hear what her master was saying. And I get it. Food has to be prepared at some point. There were a lot of guys crowding into her house, and she needed to be a good hostess. But Mary sat at the gate. Maybe Martha could have taken 5 to do the same, right? Psalm 46:10 says, be still and know that I am God. Wait on him. That's what I had for today. I'll see you tomorrow for chapter 3.